The conversation will be live. I'll just keep the conversation going.
Okay.
Second, come on.
Yeah.
Like really?
Right. Right.
All right, it should be live. Okay. Yeah, like I feel like anyone who's involved in technology, we're live by the way. Anyone who's involved in technology, like sees how the future plays out. And for me, I just sort of see these sort of exponential growth paths in ways that lead into all of these kinds of areas. And so it's like each time you're like, you've got to really consider like what is an exponential curve look like when it fully plays out, and consider the consequences of that in almost every one of these technologies that you play with. Anyway, let's get started. So, hey everyone, at this very special time, and I apologize in advance. I know for a lot of you this is surprising, but my hope is that this will show up in your feed, and if you're not catching this live, you're going to enjoy it afterwards. You'll be like, wow, I am so glad that Fraser scheduled this conversation. So, joining me today, I've got Phil Torres, who is, well, why don't you introduce yourself, Phil?
Yeah. And also, I want to say it's my apologies for the weird time because it was ultimately due to the logistics, scheduling logistics
Yep.
that were from my side.
Yeah, I
So
gave Phil whichever Monday at 5 p.m. he wanted to come on the show. He said I can't do any of them ever. He called my bluff, and so now we've got a show at a random time. But like don't everybody
yeah,
get used to this. This isn't so normal. But so who are you?
yeah. So yeah, Phil Torres. I study mostly existential risk and global catastrophic risk. So I've published a few books on the topic and a bunch of papers. And I'm currently working on another book will probably end up being quite large, and it's tentatively called A Brief History of Human Extinction. Yeah.
Right. And what brought you to my eye was you had just posted an article to, I believe it was The Conversation, the gist of which,
Nautilus.
oh, it was Nautilus. Yeah, that's right.
Yes,
Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it was to Nautilus, which is a great online magazine. And the gist of your argument was don't expect the exploration of space and the colonization of space to save us from the existential risks that we are working on right now. And I really enjoyed your point of view, and I think that or are people saying Phil's volume should be louder? Tell me where I'll crank his volume a little bit. Yeah, and I love that idea because my channel is very much about what are all the things we're learning in space exploration and what are all the things that we're learning in astronomy. And a lot of people are really enthusiastic about the idea of us
Hmm.
heading off into space, and I think there's a lot of really valid reasons why. So and I want to sort of have this conversation about space exploration a little later
Hmm.
in this show. I'd like to
Sure.
sort of start in the world of existential risks.
Yeah.
So can you sort of just define for people what is this idea of an existential risk?
Yeah, sure. And definitely, you know, listeners, let us know if the volume's not loud enough,
Yeah,
please.
you can't fix it. It's all up to me. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So there are a number of definitions of an existential risk. The term was formalized in 2002 by Nick Bostrom, who's at Oxford University, who's the founder of the Future of Humanity Institute. And his particular definition is disjunctive. It says it defines an existential risk as either human extinction or some future event that results in a permanent and drastic reduction in our capacity for desirable future development. Whatever, however you interpret that. Nick Bostrom himself has kind of a total utilitarian and transhumanistic view, which we could discuss more later. But the term also, there's kind of a looser sense that you might find in popular media articles or even sometimes scholarly articles where it's just human extinction or civilizational collapse, something of that sort. And also, I would say that the conflation of the existential with the extinctional, existential risk with risk of human survival is also pretty common, actually, in both the scholarly literature and and popular media articles about the topic. which makes sense because human extinction is a concept we're much more familiar with, at least these days. It, as I will discuss in my book, I mean, it's actually really quite a novel concept. It wasn't that long ago that basically nobody took the concepts of human and extinction and sort of smashed them together to create this composite concept. So it's a really quite, it's quite novel addition to our shared library of concepts. So there are multiple definitions, but I think probably the most prominent and most canonical is Nick Bostrom's.
Yeah, and I think that like it's really only been like up until the last couple of maybe 50 years, I guess, human beings have been able to wipe each other out in small areas in wars and there have been natural events such as plagues and famines and things that have caused a dent, and you can imagine pandemics and things like that, or a volcano that but each one of these humanity can theoretically bounce back. Like, it would suck, but you could imagine after the air cleared, after we become immune, after we stop shooting each other, that we can recover from this event. But there are new events that we are moving into, which there is potentially no coming back. And those are the existential ones.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It really is. It's this sort of a qualitatively new era. I mean, what came to mind while you were talking is, another thing I've been thinking a lot about is some people have referred to like climate change, nuclear proliferation, or more specifically activities that conduce to nuclear proliferation or fail to properly address climate change as crimes against humanity. But if you actually look at the history of crimes against the legal notion of crimes against humanity and the development of international law throughout the 20th century, I mean, it was defined. It wasn't defined in terms of the size of the event, but that was in the background. I mean, it emerged in response to genocide. These days, though, there is the possibility of not mere genocide, but omnicide, the destruction of all humanity. So the concept of crimes against humanity seems inadequate to properly describe the enormity of what an existential catastrophe would actually entail.
But it's even worse than that, right? Because you're describing, say, wiping out all humanity forever, but there are some of these existential risks that are even worse than that would theoretically wipe out all life on Earth, wink out the Earth from existence, wink out big chunks of the universe from existence. And right now, where we stand, and this sort of is where it's going to later on lead to a conversation about space exploration, we have no concrete knowledge that there is life anywhere else in the entire universe. The only evidence that we have is that life is here. And so we are the stewards of life in potentially the entire universe. And there are now triggers at our disposal, things that we can do that could theoretically, as you say, I mean, an omni-extinction, what'd you call that?
Omnicide.
Omnicide, yeah, right. Yeah. But omnicide is sort of like a murder thing, but like an omni-extinction. Anyway, we'll figure out a portmanteau later on. I like omnicide, but the fact that you could wipe out all life from the universe if we take a misstep.
Yeah, so a bunch of things occur to me. I mean, if you take a kind of synchronic perspective, like just a time slice, you can differentiate between catastrophes with different kinds of the scope of the consequences might be different. So, for example, you could kill all humans, but the biosphere remains intact. There are obviously other. I mean, initially, when just prior to detonating the first atomic bomb, which is named Trinity, in New Mexico, there was worries presented by some of the physicists working in the Manhattan Project, Teller, and some others, and Robert Oppenheimer had them double check to make sure that it's not the case that the nuclear chain reaction would propagate through the atmosphere, thereby presumably killing the the entire biosphere,
Right.
or at the very least, the terrestrial and aerial components of the biosphere. So that's one issue. If you take a diachronic perspective, then there's a famous thought experiment initially proposed by the incredible Oxonian philosopher Derek Parfit, who asked people. He's writing in the context of a nuclear conflict. This is in his Reasons and Persons, which was 1984. And he says, what is the bigger difference? Is it between peace and 99% of humanity dying out? Or is it the difference between 99% of humanity dying out and 100%? And most people, of course, would say, well, it's the former is the bigger difference. And from his point of view, it's actually the latter, because there could come to exist many more future generations. So, I mean, what you're doing is forever precluding the possibility that trillions and trillions of human beings come into existence. Carl Sagan, in his famous 1983 Foreign Affairs paper that introduced the notion of nuclear winter actually to the public, he calculated, as I'm remembering, I think it was 5 trillion biological humans in the next 10 million years. And then others since then, like Milan Cirkovic and Nick Bostrom, have proposed numbers that are astronomically large.
I think there are potentially, just in the solar system alone, you could have 1 trillion people living with plenty of space in their O'Neill cylinders as part of their Dyson swarm, no problem. And that's just in this one solar system, not to mention how many people could be living in other solar systems. So
if I remember correctly, one of Bostrom's calculations was per century in the Virgo supercluster alone, you could have 10 to the 23 biological humans.
Right.
And so he's not even considering the possibility, which is a bit
not all the simulated ones.
Not all the it seems possible. You turn planets into computronium, and then you simulate billions and billions and billions.
Now he's
it's a huge future loss from that that more diachronic perspective.
So let's talk about some of these potential existential risks and sort of move from sort of the less scary ones to some of the scarier ones. And so where do you what are some of the harmless existential risks?
Well, it's a slight oxymoron. I mean, in terms of harm, perhaps one way to classify it is how much suffering it creates. Mm-hmm. So if it's the case, for example, that the universe is in a metastable, a false vacuum state, and we're doing these. I've heard just recently that there's plans for a energy particle accelerator that's like 10 times
the power. I forget the name of it, but they're gonna scale up the Large Hadron Collider to a factor of 10.
So maybe we're conducting our experiments and we nucleate a vacuum bubble. That would destroy everybody at the instantaneously the speed of light. So in a sense, it's the harm that's done, of course, is closing off preventing human civilization from further developing, but we wouldn't feel any pain, unlike...
but like I said, also destroying the universe at the speed of light.
Right, so that also, you had mentioned earlier, the possibility, maybe we're alone in the universe. And I'm sort of inclined to accept that that's true, but I'm uncomfortable with it, because it does seem, I don't know, Ernst Mayr famously said, intelligence is maybe a lethal mutation. So, maybe it's the case that Peter Ward and I'm forgetting his co-author, who have been Brownlee, exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Have been advocating the rare earth hypothesis that, simple life is maybe prevalent, but complex life is pretty rare. So I don't know, that seems kind of true, but if there is other intelligent life out there, then I mean, if we create a vacuum bubble, it would, destroy everything in the future light cone.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's the taxonomy that I found most helpful, maybe not for theoretical reasons, but for pedagogical reasons, is basically distinguishing between natural and anthropogenic hazards. So natural ones, maybe super improbable would be like gamma ray bursts. galactic center outbursts. I'm not an expert on these particular
Yeah.
issues, but and then obviously like an asteroid impact, super volcanic eruption, natural pandemic. We're in the midst of kind of the anti-vax vaccine, the anti-vaccine movement, and a lot of those people don't realize just how many humans have perished. Way more people died in the 2 years from 1918 to 1920 from the Spanish flu. Way more people died than from 1914, 1918 in World War One.
Yeah.
So
we've got measles spreading here in Canada, in Vancouver. It's enraging because
it's
people aren't getting their vaccinations.
it's so irresponsible.
Yeah, but and that'll be a whole other show. But I mean, I think like, and I don't mean to be super flippant about the horror show that would go on from any of those natural events that you described.
Yeah.
A gamma ray burst would wipe off the protective ozone layer of the Earth from halfway across the galaxy, and would give everybody really bad sunburns and potentially cancer. An asteroid.
And if I may add, there would be no warning. It just
Yeah.
So,
Right. You had your atmosphere, and then it's gone. Or you had your ozone layer, and now it's gone. Or an asteroid smashing into the Earth. But we know that happens once every 65 million years. In fact, NASA at this point has mapped out all of the potential 1 to 10 kilometer or 1+ kilometer asteroids. None of them are any risk. Now it's just mere city killers that are out there now, right? That we have to be potentially concerned about. And so all of these things, catastrophic volcanic eruption, Earth has done this in the past, and so I think that these are all things that people are concerned about. Nuclear war, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, with each one of these things, they are all awful. Mm-hmm. And they would be devastating to humanity and to life. But life for sure would recover from any of those. Humanity, maybe, but if not us, then the octopuses take over, or the dolphins, or whatever, right?
Right.
But the issue is these ideas of the existential threats that are our fault,
Mm-hmm.
that we could stumble into, which no natural event has never seen, it wouldn't be possible, and that, as you say, would not only cause the extinction of humanity quickly, but essentially end the gene line forever.
The adventure.
Yeah, the adventure.
Project.
Yes, yeah. And I really feel that, like we don't know for sure that there is any other life in the universe, and so we feel like it is like right now, until we discover the extraterrestrials, it is our responsibility to not die.
Yeah,
I think
that's certainly one way to look at it. I personally am sympathetic very much with that view. I recently wrote a paper that's under review with colleague Simon Beard at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at Cambridge University, where we lay out for the first time, like basically all of the most powerful arguments for why human extinction would constitute a massive tragedy. And certainly the notion of cosmic uniqueness is, a lot of people do find that compelling. And again, like I said, I mean, I do as well. So yeah, it would be, I mean, there are plenty of other arguments. I mean, there's,
Sure.
I mean, I was just talking about civilization as like, an ongoing project. That's something that Edmund Burke talked about in, I guess, the 1800s, and it goes all the way back to somebody named Seneca the Younger, who wrote about, it's an amazing passage from early on. He was a tutor of the Emperor Nero, actually, where he talks about, the sky. The sky itself constitutes a topic that no single individual will be able to master in his or her life. So consequently, we accumulate knowledge over time, and it's this massive project. So, from that perspective, wouldn't it be an extraordinary shame if we were the generation that screwed everything up, and all of the moral progress that we've made since the 1950s, all of the scientific knowledge we've acquired since Copernicus, all of that ended up being just casually tossed into the fireplace, committed to the fire, as it were. So yeah, and indeed, the risks that are anthropogenic in nature are by far the most significant. So, for example, a philosopher at Oxford, who's also affiliated with the Future of Humanity Institute, named Toby Ord, he said before, his kind of estimate is there's maybe a 1 in 300 chance per century of humanity dying out as a result of a natural catastrophe. And yet he puts the likelihood of us surviving the current century at about 1 in 6. And that more or less kind of agrees with what a lot of other people who seriously look at these issues. Nick Bostrom has said that there's at least a 20% chance of human extinction this century. Lord Martin Rees at Cambridge famously wrote in 2003 that he thinks there's a 50% chance of civilizational collapse before the end. And so on and so on. I've also compiled, there's like a huge list of, serious intellectuals who have hazarded, made more or less educated conjectures about the chances of survival. So anyways, yeah, so just the contrast between the probability of natural extinction versus anthropogenic extinction immediately implies that the bulk of the risk comes from nuclear technology, as well as this, as you were mentioning before, this exponentially developing emerging technology associated with biotechnology, synthetic biology, nanotechnology, AI, drones, and so on and so on.
Yeah. I had an argument, not an argument really, a conversation at a science conference with Tyler Cowen, I think it was. He's an economist. And we were going down this rabbit hole of drone warfare against drone assassination against human beings, and how we'll get to this point in the future where everybody has AI controlled drones that they can control and they can send off to pretty much just assassinate anyone anytime they want. And so then we would all then need to have our own personal drone cloud that would be flying around us to protect ourselves from the once you, like I said, what if everyone has a drone and anyone's drone could do whatever they want with it? You can go to these really crazy rabbit holes. I'm less concerned necessarily specifically about the drones, although maybe I should be. Like I said, Tyler and I freak each other out. But I'm interested in, I think there's two that I think, I'd love to talk about. One is the AI side and sort of the rise of AI. And then the other one is just synthetic biology, but also just biotechnology in general. And, would you say that those are sort of the two biggies that we can really predict right now as being gigantic threats that we're stumbling forward into?
Yes. So I think you had intimated this earlier. If there was a all-out nuclear exchange, it probably is the case that humanity would survive in some form, probably in southern Australia or New Zealand, where a lot of billionaires are building their bunkers. But even that, there was a study out not that long ago that found 100 Hiroshima-sized bombs detonated in the subtropics would be enough for maybe a decade-long nuclear winter, but mostly in the northern hemisphere. So interestingly, at least for me, that means we really didn't have large enough arsenals until about 1953 to actually have destroyed the world. So that was kind of the moment in human history. That was a watershed moment. Around 1951, 52. But in contrast, I think AI poses probably something more along the lines of an all or nothing threat. Right. In contrast to that, I think an engineered pandemic could be profoundly, unprecedentedly catastrophic, but it probably wouldn't kill everybody. I mean, there are people in a village called, I think, Las Estrellas in Antarctica. I don't know, a couple, maybe 100 people there. The uncontacted tribes in the Amazon, and hermits up in Siberia and whatnot. So these individuals would have a good chance of surviving. I think something like the gray goo scenario. That's probably another all or nothing disaster. But yeah, AI seems extremely worrisome. despite the what some scholars have been calling AI denialism that's been promulgated by quite prominent
Yeah.
intellectuals like Steven Pinker.
And I think that like anybody who's ever used a computer and seen that it didn't do what you wanted it to do, and then you had to turn it off and turn it back on again,
Yeah,
is comfortable with the idea that computers can sometimes do things that we don't want them to do and are out of our control.
yeah,
And to think that you have control, like literally all you have to do is just like work with a computer for any length of time, and then all bets are off.
yeah.
These things are the worst. I hate them so much, and it's just a matter of time before they rise up and it's a wipe us all out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, um, I would say that the main issue isn't. I think it's maybe arguably misleading to talk about like an uprising or something of that sort. Um, the real issue is right now we have all sorts of AI systems that are extraordinarily super intelligent, but in narrow domains. Calculators are amazing, and we now have games as a result of deep learning that can AI systems that can outperform humans on games, chess, and so on. The issue is that once we create an algorithm that is more generally intelligent than humans in all of the various the relevant cognitive domains, then how do we control that algorithm? And ultimately there's a technical aspect to this problem, which is let's say we want the AI to care about happiness. How is it that we describe happiness in the programming language of the AI? But there's also, I think, the most significant, the real linchpin of this whole argument is philosophical in nature. So one reason I get a little bit frustrated when people say, "Oh, I talked to my colleague who is working on AI systems," and he or she says, "Well, I don't think AGI is that big of a concern." But it's ultimately a philosophical issue. And I would also point out that there are a lot of microbiologists who are tinkering with pathogens who don't have a good sense of what the implications of synthetic biology, CRISPR-Cas9, gene drives, and so on really are for the safety and security of humanity, or the preservation of the biosphere moving forward. So there's a parallel there. But so ultimately, it's just a philosophical issue. If you program the AI to one is so I don't, would it be helpful if I went through some of the issues?
Well, I
Okay.
I don't like I am gonna assume that most of my audience is fairly comfortable with things like the control problem, trying to how do you tell the AI what to do and what not to do, and
Sure.
I think that, like, for me, I think that you don't really need to even think about all of that, because it's all back to that exponential growth curve, both on the biological side and on the artificial intelligence side. Both of them are essentially the costs of producing more powerful AI solutions and more sophisticated biological solutions. The what you need to be able to do to be able to pull this off gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So, we may start at a time where you need the resources of an entire country to be able to create an artificial general intelligence. Then you need a research institution, and then you need a garage, and then you need a script kiddie who is, who's downloaded the AGI crack set from the internet and is releasing all kinds of artificial general intelligence into the world. Same thing with synthetic biology, right? To create a super plague, you've got to be a nation, then you've got to be a research institution, then you've got to be some people working in a garage, and then you've got to be somebody who someone with a grudge and releases a bacterial plague. And in fact, each of these will be tied multiple times because, everyone's going to be tinkering. So I feel like you don't really have to think too hard about the pathways that this is all going to take, because every combination will be tried by anybody with any amount of technical wherewithal whatsoever as the costs come down.
Yeah. As I believe Bostrom writes in his book Superintelligence, there's a line that I like where he says something along the lines of, because of these technologies getting more powerful, more accessible, and they're dual use. And some little idiot, as he, as he puts it, is bound, to exploit, to misuse and abuse the technology for some kind of, maybe omnicidal or anti-civilizational purpose. This is actually, there's been almost no work previously done on omnicidal agents, except I wrote 2 papers on it. And essentially the question was, imagine that we all have access, within fingers reach of a doomsday button. And then the question is, who exactly would push it? And one answer is, well, possibly anybody, because we're fallible. And sometimes we make mistakes, we trip on our shoelaces, we fall down the stairs, whatever. There are plenty of amazing and horrifying stories of pathogens accidentally being leaked from laboratory, even highly regulated laboratories. But actually the question, there are various classes of individuals who would indeed have grudges, or or maybe even for ethical reasons, what they would consider to be ethical reasons, they would want to wipe out humanity,
or religious reasons, or like again, it does, like when you see that there are mass shootings, when you see that there are people who are have some kind of mental disease, people who have grudges, all kinds of things. I mean, it's almost like, again, it's like you don't even need to think it through. You can just assume that that all the checks and once the checks and balances are gone, then anybody who wants to can kind of do whatever they want for all to all humanity. At their whim.
And this sort of ties into Carl Sagan's old madman argument, where he says, sometimes I talk to people who dismiss concerns about the growing, power and accessibility of technologies. Surely nobody out there would destroy the world. Well, there are madmen.
Yeah, there's plenty of people who would love to destroy the world.
I mean, as the Nazis were losing World War II, Hitler turns violence on his own people. He thought the lesser individuals were still around, and Sagan argues that if he had nuclear weapons, he might have been even more tempted just to to launch them in every direction. So, anyways, people can read about under the title of Agential Risk, and I do catalog a bunch of actual people who were both violent and who expressed in public or private some extremely disturbing omnicidal, anti-civilizational, and so on, apocalyptic views. Also, there was a paper recently, I'm not sure if it's published yet, it's up on Archive, by a Stanford scientist named John Sotos. And he offers this really fascinating model where he basically just crunches the numbers and demonstrates that, the probability of any one attempted attack, of any one individual in the world successfully inducing some kind of existential catastrophe, doesn't need to be high for the likelihood of some kind of terminal catastrophe to occur per decade or century, to basically reach 1.
Exactly. So
probabilities accumulate. So
exactly. So then I think the next step then is to talk about sort of the world that I live in, this sort of the space exploration fans, the astronomy fans. When people ask why are we going to go to space, and you ask this question to Elon Musk, etc. Going to space, colonizing Mars, colonizing the moon, these give us a backup to whatever mayhem happens down on Earth. If you're watching from Mars, it's not your problem. And in your article in Nautilus, you say, actually, sorry, it's still your problem. So can you explain why you think that potentially space exploration isn't going to be this panacea that we're all hoping? Like, can you please ruin space exploration Christmas right now?
It's funny you use the word panacea, because I often refer to it as I've referred to space colonization as being interpreted as an existential panacea. As Stephen Hawking famously said, we had before he passed away, obviously, that we have maybe 100 years left to leave the planet, or else the other option is die. That was or die was the phrase he used. And Michael Griffin, I think, who's the former administrator of NASA, said similar things. Elon Musk, of course, has talked about this as a humanitarian project. Ultimately, I should say, first of all, somebody else working on these ideas who was absolutely fundamental critical in inspiring me to think about the potential hazards of space colonization is Daniel Dewdney, who's an international relations theorist at Johns Hopkins, and he has a forthcoming book called Dark Skies, which I've read. It's not going to be out for I think maybe another year or something, but it's a brilliant, really fine-grained, highly sophisticated analysis of examination of this sort of predicament. I mean, essentially, the idea is, in international relations theory, there's, basically Thomas Hobbes was the first guy who he kind of founded, political philosophy, political science. And he pointed out that, we're in this sort of hypothetical state of nature in which there are various reasons to aggress on our neighbors. He specifically mentioned three reasons: for reputation, for gain, and for, I'm forgetting the third one. I feel like Rick Perry right now, but it'll come to me in just a moment.
Yeah.
So basically, we're in this situation, and ultimately we, it's solitary poor nasty Brutus. In short, we come together, we create this social contract that essentially constructs another entity, a referee. So we give up all sorts of freedoms for this referee to take control, and it's neutral and a neutral arbiter, and as a result, we get security. And Hobbes's view was that the reason we're in this state of nature that's bad and highly undesirable in the first place because we're all egotistical. But later on, there further developments of this idea resulting in a neorealist view. Like Kenneth Waltz is an individual who was largely responsible for this, where the idea is that there are structural features to an anarchic situation. Anarchy simply meaning that there's no top-down kind of apparatus or structure that can impose law and order, and thereby replace anarchy with hierarchy. So when we're in this anarchic situation, there's certain mechanisms that can prevent conflict from breaking out. You might trust people. If I trust you not to stab me, then I'm going to feel secure. We're going to be okay. There are policies of deterrence. There are obviously the Leviathan. If you create a governmental system. So the question is, when we move out into space and we create this radically multipolar configuration, and there are maybe millions of different civilizations all over the place, what should we expect? How is it that we can ensure that future world is peaceful?
Right.
And it's kind of hard to figure out why. So on the one hand, as we migrate through the cosmos, we'll undergo evolution. There might, if we're still biological creatures, then there will no doubt be, new Darwinian pressures to evolve. Different gravitational pull, different planets, different atmospheric pressures, solar luminosities, and so on.
Right.
And so on.
And so, but the gist is really that when we go to space, we're going to take us to space. And yes. we're gonna do what we do, like the same things that we do here on Earth. We're gonna take to space. And if people think that somehow not only will you get a chance to go to space, but also utopia, is not understanding how this tends to play out. Wherever humans go, they seem to bring their humanity with them.
Yeah. So, and I would put it just slightly differently. Are we frozen? Oh no, we're not. Okay, good. Okay, good. So I would say that, we moving into space, we cannot escape the structural aspects of the world today that result in insecurity. And it might be even worse than that. As we go out into space and we diversify there are all these speciation events, as a result of living in different environments, and also through, using person engineering technologies through cyborgization to create, biotechnological hybrids, perhaps, completely uploaded, completely machinic kind of entities, that this diversity, this kind of radical diversity, will undercut trust, which is one of the possible mechanisms for preventing conflict from breaking out. So then there's the question, okay, well, would a cosmic Leviathan work? It certainly worked within nation states here. It's, in fact, Steven Pinker identifies the establishment of government, state systems as one of the major reasons why violence has declined over time. So could we do it in space? And I suppose your audience knows probably much better than I do that space is big,
right?
And you can't have your government. You can't provide security as a state for your citizens if you're not properly coordinated. If you call the police and you say someone's going to stab me, and they show up 2 weeks later, they speed up, and it's with tires screeching 2 weeks later. That's not effective. I might as well not live in. I might as well just live in, state of nature. So, I think a cosmic Leviathan is going to have coordination problems such that it's just not going to provide a solution. So then we're down two possibilities, and you're left with the question: well, what other options do we have for ensuring that there's peace?
Just with some of the existential threats that we face here on Earth, when you look at, say, the AI problem, it's not as if AI can't chase us to space. They'd be glad to chase us to space. They would thrive chasing us in space. And at any point, somebody could be working on an asteroid base somewhere in the, deep in the asteroid field. They could release a swarm of self-replicating robot probes that gobble up all of the asteroid belt and then pelt asteroids at any of their enemies. So all you've done is you've made an environment that is easier for one of those existential threats to happen. And say maybe it'll be a little tougher for someone to release a pathogen through space, but you could totally just start, putting tiny little robot factories on asteroids and just start shifting around the asteroid field into trajectories that harm your enemies in the future. Like with the resources of the solar system at our disposal, with the technologies coming into our hands at various levels, the exact same existential threats that we are thinking about here on Earth scale beautifully up to the entire solar system, and the problem remains. And I guess the point is that we need to sort it out, or we have to sit down and sort this out, hopefully once and for all. Otherwise, the risks, the stakes just get higher and higher and higher.
Also, it's worth pointing out that there are all sorts of potential super advanced weapons that could really exacerbate the predicament. You mentioned weaponized asteroids. I like the term planetoid bomb for those. But they're like
your black hole factory on your your super large space hadron collider.
Definitely kinetic, the rods from God. I don't know if you've heard of those. Directed energy weapons that, a laser or something that could potentially destroy. Obviously lasers moving at, the speed of light, 186, 262 or whatever it is, miles per second, and, destroy targets. There's also, as you get more and more of these beings out there, there's an increasingly formidable forensic task of figuring out, if you are attacked in a non-existential manner, who did it? There's all of these different, and maybe they have minds, cognitive architectures that are completely different. This also gets back to the trust issue. They have maybe emotional ranges, normative worldviews, just to put it, in very broad terms, that are alien, to use the most apt term. So it does seem like, and also, some people have, Milan Cirkovic has responded to some of these ideas by saying, well, I'm a lot of these arguments are based on like, extrapolating human issues, into space. But really, what we should be doing is thinking about post-human, post-biological beings and how they might behave. And I find that to be extremely uncogent, because the crux of the argument has to do, once again, with structural issues, with game theory, and game theory concerns what rational agents should do. So it's not, insofar, I mean, as far as we could tell right now, insofar as it's the case that these post-biological beings are, out in space and are rational, then they have a reason to engage in, the spiral of militarization, to secure themselves, to attack first in the, Hobbesian predicament, to attack first, to eliminate the possibility, even if there's a small possibility, you might want to just, kill your neighbor. In this, so even for agents who are completely benevolent, maybe altruistic, if they are not 100% sure that the neighbor isn't going to destroy them at some point, and there's no cosmic leviathan to in top-down fashion impose law and order, then you kind of have a reason. And it's insofar as your neighbor, let's say they're altruistic, are thinking the same thing, they're going to start to build up their offensive weapons. That's going to make you, and this is the security dilemma of
right. And so
international relations.
And even if you go galaxy wide, right? Am I sending my fleet of self-replicating von Neumann probes to your home system to turn your entire home system into planet-killing planetoids, right? So, all right. So bring it all home for everybody. I want to give people a chance to ask you some questions, because I've been completely hogging the conversation, and I apologize, but come on. But what can we do?
Well,
what can we do about this? Come on, man. We got to sort this out. What's the plan? How do we prevent an ongoing, accelerating existential threat that is on multiple pathways? Each one is on exponential growth.
Yeah. Well, one of the more creative ideas, and this comes from another Oxford scholar named Anders Sandberg, who's a truly extraordinary, polymathic guy, and I feel comfortable saying this because he's mentioned this in public a few times, because initially there's kind of information hazard issues surrounding it. But it could be possible, perhaps, to create some kind of informational seed that encodes your civilization, and then to induce a vacuum bubble.
That's your plan. That's your plan.
Universe, so hold on, just to be clear, this is the most creative and interesting and extreme idea, just to be sure. But okay, so sort of returning to the more mundane, as it were.
Write a note, write a message in a bottle, put it into a different universe, and then hope that at some point someone reads it. No.
Mikio Kaku has also talked about the possibility of, as a result.
We'll set that aside and call it Plan B. All right.
Okay. Yeah.
Give me the plan A, the one where we figure out a way to permanently prevent, ideally, existential threats from wiping out humanity, potentially all life in the universe.
Yeah. So I think. So let me just say, first of all, like, the field of existential risk study is nascent, and it's burgeoning right now. There are a lot of young minds who are attracted to it, but like I said before, the very notion of human extinction, like, wasn't seriously entertained until quite recently. So my point is, like, there hasn't been all that much research so far done on these issues. Some ideas are like, well, maybe we could, this is exactly in line with what we were talking about before, we could establish some kind of singleton or global governing system, that could impose, that could ensure security for all the member individual citizens of the globe, as well as the nation states and so on. That's a possibility. I mean, some people have talked about surveillance. Other ideas that are, again, kind of a bit a little bit out there, but people are feeling around in the dark and sort of desperately grasping for good ideas. Is like moral bioenhancement. Is maybe there are ways that we can use technology or some kind of pharmaceutical to enhance our moral dispositions of altruism, which can be decomposed into a sympathetic concern and empathy, as well as our sense of justice. And in fact, the two scholars who are also at Oxford, who are the most energetic exponents of this view, they kind of shrug when it comes to the issue of lone agents or small terrorist groups or something like that. And they say, well, I don't know, maybe we need literally, I mean, they're progressives, to be clear, on the political spectrum, but they say, I don't know, maybe society needs to become a little less liberal and we need more surveillance. This is not ideal.
Yeah,
Do you have a better idea?
Yeah, well, so my best idea, like, having thought through all of the possibilities, my best idea is you essentially come up with an AGI with an artificial general intelligence, and that doesn't want to turn us all into paper clips, and instead wants to protect us from wiping ourselves out, and it has to be the first one, and then it has to then be the best one, right? And that's and that I feel like that, because we can't make the decision. No human, humans can't make the decisions fast enough. Humans can't notice somebody, and so it does, unfortunately, like. And that if you don't get that one AI cranked up and protecting us, then oh man, there's this video game called Destiny. I don't know if you've ever played video games in Destiny, and I forget, Rasputin, I think. Anyway, there's an AI that one of the civilizations creates, and it's called Rasputin, and it sort of out-hacks every other AI, and they are protected. And that's it. And so you've just got to make an AI that can out-hack all the other AIs, and it will protect you, and then hopefully it also won't want to turn you into paper clips. Like, that's all I've got.
I wrote a book chapter on this exact issue. It's in a book called Artificial Intelligence, Safety and Security, where I talk about a post-singularity social contract, where essentially we give up our freedom to govern over to some kind of friendly AI that perhaps is designed specifically to govern. There's a nice term that's been coined and is being discussed recently called algocracy, rule by algorithms. And well, in the paper itself, I mean, I say, like, I don't know, it's kind of a crazy idea. And my God, the control problem, as I probably your viewers may concur, I think it's probably one of the most formidable.
Yeah.
I mean, it pertains to perennial philosophical issues that we've been struggling with since the pre-Socratic philosophers. So apparently we need to solve some of these axiological issues before the first one, because we're not going to get to scrap an AGI ASI system to start over. So it's fraught with all sorts of issues, but yes, it seems like, again, the gist of my argument is, here's possibly one way we create the superintelligence that governs the planet. Do you have a better idea? Because
no, that's that. Like I said,
I would love to know what it is.
No. But I mean, and then
I mean the general you. By the way,
the general, the people who are watching.
Yeah.
Anyone's got a great idea, just go ahead and type it in. You can be right at the forefront of existential risk research right now. You write a paper. If anyone's got any questions for Phil, that would be great. I know I've been completely hogging his time, but it's been this is, as you can tell, this is sort of a thing that I think a lot about, and so getting a chance to chat with you was a lot of fun. But yeah, I think you're going. You mentioned you're going to be getting a chance to do more of this work shortly. What are some of the branches of this that you are going to be putting some of your energy into? What are some ideas for papers? What are some things that you're working on right now?
One is a paper on crimes against humanity and existential risks. I've been toying a little bit with the notion of super crimes or
super crimes.
Super crimes. Just because, again, crimes against humanity just doesn't. And in fact, all of the individuals that the International Criminal Court has has tried for crimes against humanity have been individuals in kind of who have done truly horrific things. Please don't get me wrong, but it's all been like pretty localized, and ultimately, it just as a matter of fact, those horrific atrocities that these individuals committed pale in comparison to what an existential catastrophe would entail. So that's one idea. But right now I'm just really wrapped up in this book project on the history of it's called A History of Human Extinction, but really what it is a history of the idea of human extinction. When did we first, entertain this idea? And a few people kind of you see kind of hints of it around the 1860s when the second law of thermodynamics was first articulated by Lord Kelvin and some others. Lord Kelvin himself immediately rejects the idea that the universe, if it's an isolated system, is going to run down and become completely inhospitable, mostly for religious reasons. Darwin himself, he became quite agnostic towards the end of his life, and pretty much the only time you would think that he would have considered at some point the possibility of human extinction, because extinction is absolutely central to his theory of natural selection, and he also believes that humans are animals. So you would think that he would have made that connection in some point, conjectured about, our future in that sense. But the only time he ever gestures at the possibility of human annihilation is when he's writing, I believe it's a letter to a friend in like 1871 or something, when he explicitly mentions the second law of thermodynamics. But then it's just not really. H.G. Wells maybe was one of the very first. Even before that, Lord Byron. In 1816, which is in the aftermath of the eruption of Tambora, which resulted in the year without a winter, wrote his poem Darkness, and that was the first time ever where there's kind of some explicit hints that humanity could completely disappear forever. But then it's not until, I don't know, the 1980s that people, a little bit after World War II, there was concern about like radioactive fallout and radiation and that affecting, that causing, mutations in genes. But it really wasn't until the 1980s. And then again, the field was, I think, formally kind of founded in 2002 with Nick Bostrom's paper. So this is really recent stuff. You don't need to read that much to end up on the absolute vanguard of contemporary research. So it's really exciting. There's low-hanging fruit all over the place. I've mentioned some of the papers I've written are on topics that nobody's written about before. So that's low-hanging fruit. Omnicidal agents. What are all of the various arguments, moral and non-moral, for why human extinction would be a catastrophe? There's no previous paper on that. So right. I do encourage people to get excited about the topic, not just because if we're successful, it means you get to continue living, and same with your kids and grandkids or whatever.
You're welcome, universe.
Yeah.
For
but
life.
Also because it's exciting. They're heady times. For us existential risk scholars. Oh, and there's also some people in the field like to joke it's a growth thing. So there's kind of job security.
Right, exactly. Well, it's interesting. That there is actually, you saying there's only one place in the entire world that has a dedicated group thinking about this?
There's really two research institutes, the Center for the Study of Existential Risks at Cambridge and Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford. There's also the Future of Life Institute, but that they do more kind of outreach, same with the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Perhaps another notable institute is MIRI in Berkeley, California, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute. And they mostly focus on AGI and view value alignment issues. Otherwise, like, there's a few here and there. There's one in Stockholm that's focused on the future of humanity, but and some of the scholars who are really top-notch do publish papers on existential risk issues. But not that. Nick Bostrom famously, like in one of his papers, said like, here are the number of publications over a certain amount of time on dung beetles, and here are the number of publications on existential risk. I've similarly done. You can do what I've done and just go to a Google Scholar and search existential risk, versus different genes, FOXP2 gene or cancer. Super Mario Brothers was one that I searched for. Way more scholarship on video games, which I think is valuable in a certain way for sure. But in terms of priorities, something seems kind of off there. So I would argue.
Well, Phil, we've reached the end of our hour, and this has been absolutely fascinating. There was one question that I wanted to just throw your way, just a quick one. When do you guess we see an artificial general intelligence? What's your just pick your date?
I would say, first of all, studies show that experts are no better at guessing.
That's fine.
This issue than people who have no idea. So you might as well go onto the street and ask someone. So I would say, with that in mind, I have no idea. I think there's a non-trivial chance that a kid born today will end up living in a world where she or he is joined by a cognitive system that is, for the first time in human history, is smarter than any human. I think it's a non-trivial chance, but I'm not going to venture percentage.
So sometime let me say
100% chance in the next 5 years. I'll just throw that out there, and if I'm right, then
nice. That was good. That was a perfect one, and don't worry, no one's gonna hold you to that. Okay. And if you're wrong, then the existential risk gets punted down the road. So I think really you win either way. You either win the bet, or humanity continues on for longer than you were expecting.
Yeah, so, I think 5 years would be too soon. Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. All right. Well, Phil, it was awesome to talk to you. You've got a couple of books that people should know. Did you? Oh, I should have asked you to have them at arm's length. Do you have them handy?
I don't know.
Oh man, rookie mistake. Yeah, always have your books. But I put a link I'll put a link to a bunch of your books so people can go and check them out. And you have a website where you talk about some of the work you're doing as well, right?
Yeah, risksandreligion.org. And you can also follow me on Twitter at X and then Riskology.
Riskology.
X Riskology.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the Omni Criminal. I think would be that's a great Twitter handle too.
Yeah, that's a good thought.
But Ben, it was a lot of fun to chat with you, and keep me posted as you continue to work to save humanity. We're all counting on you. Apparently, that's it. So you and Nick Bostrom.
Well, if that's the case, we're in trouble. So.
All right, thanks a lot, and thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Take care.